The biggest question that you probably have is this movie worth the high praise that it's gotten? Is this the best movie since Infinity War and Endgame? And in my opinion, yeah, it is. I saw it 3 times opening weekend, and I plan to see it at least one more time before it leaves theaters. This will be a spoiler-free review until I give my rating and dive deeper into what I said in the spoiler-free part. And get into specifically why I love this movie and why this movie is one of my favorite MCU movies. There's a lot to talk about, so there'll be time codes in the description so you can skip around to the parts you want to hear. But let's get into it. When I first saw this movie on Thursday, the day before its premiere, I was at an 8, which is still really solid. But I felt like I needed to watch it again just for this review because there was so much to take in and digest. So I went to go see this movie the next day, and I'm so glad I did because I ended up enjoying this movie so much more. Just taking everything in and knowing the story just made it hit surprisingly harder on the second watch. I was literally itching to see it again. I had to stop myself from seeing it 3 days in a row. I had to sit and think about this movie for a day before I went out to go see it for a 3rd time to solidify my rating. This is the best Phase 5 project so far. I mean, the only comp right now is Ant-Man Quantumania, so it really didn't need to do much to get that trophy. But seriously, the writing, the characters, cinematography, costume design, set design, sound design, the score, the soundtrack, and pretty much everything else feels like it was crafted with so much care. This is the best Marvel movie in a while. And I'm not saying that we haven't gotten good movies or projects, but this has potential to be my favorite Marvel movie ever. It's easily the most well-rounded out of all the recent projects. Most of the recent Marvel projects feel like they're lacking in one area or another. Bad CGI, the writing isn't good, visuals are bland, bad sets and costume designs. But Guardians 3, it has the least problems out of all the recent stuff and really knocks it out of the park in damn near every area. My mindset in trying to find the least amount of problems in this stuff instead of focusing on what's great should speak to the fluctuating quality Disney has in its recent projects. And I say Disney and not just Marvel because Star Wars has been the same way. I got something cooking up for that mediocre ass season of The Mandalorian. But this movie is honestly special, man. There's so much to love about it. It has all the heart of the previous movies and then some. The themes of family, figuring out who you are, and just accepting yourself just hit so hard. The theme that hit the hardest for me though was family. That's always been an important part in the Guardians movies, but I just connected with it so much in this one. There's some genuinely sad, heartfelt moments that add so much good characterization to these great characters. I ain't gonna lie to you, I dropped a tear or two on my second watch. I'll say what part had my eyes sweating when I get to spoilers. But James Gunn, he crafted something truly magical with this movie if you've been invested in these characters. I remember so vividly being 13 on summer vacation the summer before 8th grade visiting family. I was heavily invested in the MCU at this point, but I knew barely anything about the Guardians of the Galaxy. My uncle took me to see the first Guardians movie back in 2014, and I was blown away by it. Ever since then, I fucked with the Guardians so tough, and they quickly became my favorite team over the Avengers. I just love all their dynamics with each other so much. They play off each other perfectly. They deadass feel like a family, and that's what makes me like them over the Avengers. The way James Gunn makes everyone's arc come full circle in 2.5 hours is truly masterful. Every character is highlighted in some way, and they all get their shine in emotional moments. The whole cast brings their A game. All their performances are amazing, but the character that inched out standing above everyone else was the High Evolutionary, played by Chukwudi Iwuji. The High Evolutionary is easily in the conversation for best MCU villain. I don't know jack shit about him in the comics, but he's so despicable and menacing in this movie, and I loved it. His terrifying outbursts and his masterfully unhinged line delivery really makes him feel so ominous and scary. I just love the way he acts in this smug, sarcastic, better than everyone way. It's so good. The High's mannerisms are so perfect and add so much to his character. His sly looks and face twitches are key aspects of his character. That stuff, plus his sadistic ways, really makes you love to hate him. And they really make up for the lack of action he has in this movie. I really only have 2 minor problems with him, with the lack of action being one of them, but I'll get to that in spoilers. Even with those problems though, this is probably my favorite MCU villain so far. He's just so fucking tough. He played his role so well in this movie. This movie really has some of my favorite action in the whole MCU. And it has probably my favorite action sequence in the MCU ever. The action is used pretty sparingly, but it hits hard whenever it's on screen. The camera work is a big reason why the action's so good. And it's probably the best camera work in the MCU. When characters get hit by a haymaker from a character that could throw a fucking bus, they get brutally knocked off their feet, damn near doing a backflip with the camera spinning with them. All the camera movements and zooms just add so much flair to the action. The action utilizes mostly everyone's abilities so well and really shows you what they could do. This movie does some really fun things with the characters' powers. There are some characters that I would have liked to see more from, but what we got from them was still super solid. I can't wait to talk about the action and spoilers because there's some really dope moments. The Guardians movies have always looked visually pleasing. Bright, vibrant colors, great cinematic shots, great cinematography, and weird, cool sci-fi stuff. But this movie is at its peak with all of those. I just like the way this movie looks, and I'm not talking about the stuff I just mentioned, which I'll tap into in a second. I don't know a lot about filmmaking, so I don't know if it's the color grading or the color correction they did on this movie, or if it's the cameras they use, but this movie just feels so distinct from a lot of Marvel projects. I've seen real movie heads complain about this when it happens in movies, but I've seen them complain about the aspect ratio that changes throughout a movie. What that means are the black bars at the bottom and top of the screen make it wider or shorter. Usually they stay the same for the whole movie. There are some movies though that change between the two mid-movie, which most people, myself included, usually don't notice. The last movie that I've seen a lot of people complain about that did this was Transformers: The Last Knight. They would do it for literally no reason, and it was so distracting, even I noticed it. But Guardians 3 changes aspect ratios to really help the feel of the movie. During the big action scenes, it goes to a wider aspect ratio to show as much of the nuts to butts action as possible. And during the regular talking scenes, it changes to a much smaller aspect ratio, and you notice it, but in a good way. I liked it so much in this movie because it makes all the talking scenes feel a lot more personal and intimate compared to the big action scenes. But besides the stuff on a more technical level, the cinematography is some of my favorite in the MCU. The shots are just so creative and they really feel like they were crafted with care. There's certain framing and close-up shots of characters in action really added so much visual flair and tension to the scenes that needed them. I kind of talked about it in action, but the camera movement is just so smooth. It's not just static for the whole movie, or just doing different angles here and there. Some of the movement of the camera during certain scenes really pull you into the moment and help you get fully invested in it. I've always liked the comedy in the Guardians movies. Yeah, it's still MCU comedy, so if you don't like it, then you just don't like it. Back then, that really wasn't a difference with how the MCU comedy was, but now, in a lot of recent projects, that isn't the case. Not all, but a lot of the comedy feels forced, so the comedy in this movie just felt like a return to form in a way. I love all the sci-fi shit and vibrant colors that comes in the Guardians films, but I think James Gunn got as weird as he could in this movie, and I mean that in the best way possible. The sci-fi elements are so great in this movie, there are some really unique things. And all the sci-fi stuff that isn't CGI looks so smooth. The practical costumes and set designs are so good. Some set pieces are so unique and colorful. This movie has some of my favorite sci-fi sequences in a while. Before I get into the negatives and my rating, I want to talk about the masterfully picked music in this movie. Music, especially with the right visuals, could just put me in the right mood or vibe that the music or instrumental is on. I listen to mostly rap with some R&B sprinkled in, but I'm open to all music if it makes me feel something. The music in the Guardians movies have always been an important part in them, but I never really connected with any of the music besides just thinking it was very fitting for the scene. But this movie had two songs that instantly spoke to me. And they just brought out so many emotions, instantly added them to my playlist, and they've been in rotation ever since. The music usage in this are the best out of any Guardians movie. The songs that were picked are so deliberate, it's insane. In some cases, they say everything for a character, perfectly capturing their feelings and speaking for them in a way. The problems I have with this movie are minor, but they're still problems. There are a couple plot conveniences that are annoying, but nothing too bad. They would have bothered me more in a worse movie, but I can't cap and say they didn't bother me at least a little bit. But besides that, a couple characters feel underutilized, not wasted, but def not used to their full potential, either action-wise or character focus and development-wise. There are things that deadass don't get addressed and just don't take the proper time to shine some light on, but they're all pretty minor compared to what this movie actually manages to pull off, so it's really not a big deal. Some of the CGI feels a little video gamey during some of the action sequences. On the whole, it looks smooth, but it did dip here and there. But even with its problems, I haven't felt this type of emotion from start to finish from a Marvel movie in a while. There have been hard-hitting moments here and there like in Wakanda Forever and No Way Home, but nothing has come close to making me feel this way from start to finish since Infinity War and Endgame. I definitely need to sit with this longer and rewatch some movies, but no lie, this might be in my top 3 comic book movies of all time. This movie is probably the darkest Marvel movie, and I'm not saying that like it was too much or anything. This movie is literally rated PG-13. But a lot of Marvel movies are usually passable for kids in the 6 to 8 range. But I don't think this is one of those to take the kiddos to. But I don't agree with people taking points off their rating because it's darker than your usual Marvel film. You can def not like it and not enjoy some of the more unsettling parts. But all of it is useful for the story, and none of it is over the top violent for no reason. Most of the truly violent and gut-turning stuff is at most heavily implied. If you're taking points off your rating because of that stuff, I'm not gonna lie. You're soft. Because I wasn't seeing people saying this stuff when Thanos was literally lining people up to be put to death by a firing squad while we see their bodies drop to the floor. But besides it being a little darker than your typical Marvel movie, which I think is great, and despite my problems, the characters are phenomenal, writing is A1, cinematography and camera work are beautiful, it has vibrant colors and cool sci-fi stuff, amazing soundtrack and score, and decent comedic moments. All of that just makes this a beautifully crafted experience, and I loved it from start to finish. Everyone should go see this movie in theaters, or at least support it on streaming, even if you aren't invested in these characters. It's just an all-around good movie, and a must-see if you're a comic book movie fan. This movie is honestly special to me, but I was just going up and down in my rating, and I wanted to make sure I talked about everything I wanted to. So with that being said, my rating for this movie, it's 10 out of 10. This is the best MCU movie since Infinity War, which I think is the best MCU movie. I still have my problems with this movie, which I'll expand on in spoilers, but they're pretty minor compared to everything I loved about this movie. This movie just has so much rewatchability. It has some of my favorite set pieces, cinematography, action, starts and endings, and the entirety of the whole MCU. And I can't wait to see where this fits in my favorite comic book movies in the future. This movie is the best in the trilogy. This for sure puts up Guardians for best comic book trilogy ever. I think the Dark Knight trilogy is the only trilogy that's giving the Guardians of the Galaxy any competition purely from a movie making standpoint. The Dark Knight has its own tone and visual flair that sets it apart from a lot of the comic book movies. And I think the Guardian trilogy is the only trilogy in the MCU that has its own unique visual flair. Yeah, they still feel like Marvel movies, but they have the benefit of James Gunn being able to do what he wants with them and get wackier and just get fully creative as the movies go on. So they have just enough to set them apart from the rest of the MCU trilogies. But for my personal enjoyment, Captain America, Iron Man, and MCU Spider-Man's trilogies are all in the conversation as well. I would have to give these 5 trilogies a rewatch to say which one I like more, because I think it's important to factor in the outside help that these MCU trilogies get to make them better. The Guardians movies tell a pretty complete story for the first 2, but you're missing some key moments for the first movie if you take out Infinity War and Endgame. The events of Captain America, Winter Soldier, and Civil War are both heavily influenced by the first 2 Avengers movies and the rest of the MCU events. Not all, but a lot of the important Spider-Man moments are in other movies. And without the context from those movies and ones made literally 10 plus years ago, you're missing a lot of emotional context. So if you don't watch all those tie-in movies, you're missing key context that make all those movies so great. And that's important to think about when you're talking about the Dark Knight trilogy, because that trilogy is goated off those 3 movies alone. No outside help, no emotional and key characters getting killed off in other movies. None of that. So it's not really fair to say Guardians or any of the others are better. When they all have movies outside of their trilogies, propping them up and giving them more context and emotional weight. The Iron Man trilogy is probably the only one that stands the most on its own without any outside influences. Because it had the benefit of being the first trilogy, Iron Man 3 gets influenced by the Avengers, but that's pretty much it. And don't get it twisted, I know that these trilogies are still going to be good even if I watch only the 3 movies that are in them, but I don't know if I could say that they're masterpieces without the outside help. I would have to watch these MCU trilogies again to see how they stand on their own, which would be kind of hard to do because I already know the context. If we weren't going off that though, and the movies outside of the MCU trilogies counted, Guardians or the MCU Spider-Man trilogies will probably be the best to me without a rewatch. But for now, going off that logic, The Dark Knight still has the crown for best comic book trilogy, until said rewatch happens. I didn't mention the non-MCU trilogies either, because yeah, they got some bangers individually, like Logan, Spider-Man 1 and 2, the first 2 X-Men movies, but they all got stinkers in their lineup, bringing the whole trilogy down. Logan has X-Men Origins Wolverine, the Raimi movies have Spider-Man 3, the X-Men movies have Last Stand. Even though I personally like those movies, they really stink up the trilogies that they're in. Maybe I'll make a video ranking the comic book trilogies one day. Who knows? But enough trilogy talk. Let's get into spoilers because there's a lot to talk about. This is your warning that I'm about to talk about spoilers. If you don't want to know anything, then leave the video now. But if you just don't care, then stick around. But let's tap in. I'll just start with the star of the movie, Rocket Raccoon. Rocket's arc throughout these movies is so fucking amazing. Rocket and Gamora have always been my favorite Guardians, but Rocket has some of the best character moments in the MCU, and this movie keeps that trend going strongly. They flesh him out more than he already is and give him so much substance, and they all just hit so hard. This movie really solidified Rocket not only being my favorite Guardian, but one of my favorite characters in the entirety of the MCU. He's just a tragically fun character that has a surprising amount of depth that is so interesting to explore. We've known that he's been experimented on, being cut open over and over again to turn him from a regular raccoon to what he is now. but we never knew all the details of it and just how truly sad it was. I felt everything Rocket was going through in this movie. Rocket being out for most of the story kind of sucked because he couldn't interact with the Guardians as much, but he comes back for the last hour getting to interact with the team. It's not all bad though, because his flashback with the other animals in the hive were great. Seeing all the unresolved trauma that the Hive put him through is so heartbreaking. All of Rocket's flashbacks were so sad. Rocket is really such a tragic character. He really felt like the Hive's love for him was something beyond collecting data. When the Hive breaks Baby Rocket down, telling him that he's just a failed experiment that looks like he was put together by a bunch of fat-fingered children and was just a stepping stone to get to his perfect creations, is honestly one of the saddest moments in the MCU for me. That flashback adds so much context to why Rocket hates himself and why he sings "I Want a Perfect Body" at the start of the movie. And when he finally gets the sense to escape after that, all of his animal friends are killed by the Hive. This was such a good moment because Baby Rocket just lets out this primordial scream to let out all his frustrations. I just love when a character lets out a scream from the depths of their soul, letting out all of their emotions. But while Rocket is down bad going through it, the Hive starts to mock him and makes fun of his suffering. Chuck Woody just delivers this moment so well, and it ends with Baby Rocket ripping the Hive's face off and stealing a spaceship to escape. Rocket has so many great emotional moments in this movie, and my favorite is the intro. The intro for this movie is my favorite intro for an MCU movie so far. It starts off with Baby Rocket before any of the cruel experiments were done to him. He's in a cage wrestling with a bunch of other baby raccoons. It's actually a cute moment. But it quickly becomes ominous when the High Evolutionary slowly walks in, with his main features being hidden by the unfocused camera and the waistline shot. As the High Evolutionary slowly gets closer to the cage, all of the raccoons scatter and get out of the way, with Rocket being the only one not to run, seemingly frozen in fear. As the High slowly reaches his hand into the cage, with dramatic music blaring in the background helping set the ominous and thrilling tone. The beautiful framing of the shots just adds so much visual flair and tension to the scene. As the Hive's hand gets closer and closer to Rocket, with the music getting louder and louder, it suddenly goes just completely silent. The camera zooms in on Baby Rocket's face, and the acoustic version of Creep starts to play by Radiohead, as Baby Rocket's face goes into a time-lapse that ends with the modern-day Rocket. Let's talk about the first part of this intro before we get into the rest. This first part of course sets up the emotional tension for the rest of the intro. But more importantly, this 30-40 seconds sets up the terrifying presence of the High Evolutionary, and just the overall hold he has on Rocket throughout this movie. The way that Baby Rocket froze up is the same way he freezes up when Rocket comes back to life, after hearing the Hive's voice on speaker for the first time in a very long time. Adult Rocket instantly freezes up, looking so terrified, snapping back into that baby raccoon he once was. The first part of this intro is short, but it's an incredibly powerful moment that just pulls on your heartstrings. It sets up so much, and it just puts you in the right mood for the rest of the intro. With the time-lapse ending on present-day Rocket, Creep by Radiohead starts to play. A song masterfully picked for this sequence and the perfect song for Rocket to be singing. This is one of the two songs that I instantly clicked with and added to my playlist. But the song plays as Rocket goes through their hideout, looking at all the townspeople and the Guardians with tears in his eyes. Why this song is such a great pick is because it basically says that everything Rocket needs to say without him even speaking. Him singing some of the words to the song hit even harder. The lyrics that Rocket chooses to sing are really important. I want to have control. I want a perfect body. Rocket eventually walks in on Peter blackout drunk, with Peter getting mad at Rocket for using his Zune without asking him and then drunkenly passing out after. Nebula then carries Peter out of the bar, with all the other Guardians members surrounding her to see what's wrong with Peter, but not being surprised it's from him being too drunk. But while the song picks up, blasting at its peak, the team forms up and walks towards the camera in this slow motion pace, with the title card of the movie showing up with the team all together. The song finally ending with the song faintly playing as Nebula tucks a drunk Peter into bed. Before she can leave, he grabs her arm while still unconscious and tells her, "I love you, Gamora," before she finally gets up and leaves. The intro perfectly sets the tone for this movie and sets up the key narratives in such an emotional way so effortlessly. The ominous presence of the High Evolutionary and the hold he has on Rocket. Rocket's negative feelings towards himself, still not being over his tragic past and not feeling like he belongs. Peter's alcohol problem and his arc to find himself and make peace with the new Gamora and accept the fact that she isn't gonna love him anymore. And some smaller things like Drax refusing to dance. On my first watch, I def felt the emotion in this intro, but it was really only fueled by the first part with Baby Rocket and my time already spent with these characters. On my first watch, I jokingly wrote in my notes, Rocket's on his emo boy shit, simping the music on Peter's Zune. It wasn't until my second watch, knowing exactly what happened to Rocket and the parallels with the ending that made this intro really hit me. This is the part of the movie that made me drop a couple tears. The song choice is just so fitting, it made me feel exactly what Rocket was going through. Knowing everything that happens in this movie just made me feel so much emotion on the second watch. I haven't felt this type of emotion for an intro to an MCU movie since Infinity War and Endgame. It's so perfect to me, it just sets off the movie so perfectly. Rocket's hero's journey in this movie is just so great, and I love that he finally says his name in the classic James Bond way. The name is Rocket, or Rocket Raccoon. That easily could have came off as cheesy or corny, but they pulled it off super well. Lila tells Rocket that he's always been the main character in this trilogy, and you really feel that in this movie. And looking back on the other movies, you can def feel that vibe. Because besides Peter, he has the biggest character arc out of all the Guardians members. I was honestly surprised he actually didn't die at the end of this movie. He's actually one of the only OG Guardians that stays on the team. This was just such a great conclusion to his arc. Peter Parker. My bad, wrong Peter. Star-Lord has always been my least favorite member out of the Guardians. Because out of a talking tree, a cybernetically modified raccoon, the deadliest woman in the galaxy, and now a telekinetic Russian space dog, Peter Quill becomes the least interesting member in my opinion. That's not saying I don't like his character, because I do. I think he's super fun, and he has a lot of emotional depth that is really interesting to explore. But out of all the cool members, I can't say that he's my favorite. But besides Rocket, Peter has the most highlighted character arc throughout this trilogy, and I really liked his journey in this movie. After losing Gamora, Peter has to face the music and get his shit together because he's spiraling out of control. I just love how he slowly accepts the new Gamora and lets her be her own person and doesn't try to turn her into what she was to them. It really hit hard that he and Gamora don't end up together again. Not every love story has a happy ending, but I think it's so good for his character and Gamora's so they can grow and do their own things. Peter has the second song that I instantly clicked with and added to my playlist. The song is Do You Realize by the Flaming Lips. I just love how this song is used. Peter is alone with his headphones in, blasting the song while staring into a beautiful blue cosmos while reminiscing over Gamora. The song and the visuals just put you in the right headspace to feel exactly what Peter's going through. I just love the isolation I felt for Peter during this scene. First, a slow wide shot of Peter standing alone on the deck of their big spaceship, then a personal close-up shot of his face, making you really feel the moment. And then the framing of his lonely, isolated silhouette staring into the beautiful blue void, with the music blasting in the background, just makes this moment hit so fucking hard. It's just such a powerful use of a song, and leads into a great moment of Mantis and Drax pulling Peter out of that isolation, telling him to stop chasing after Gamora and to find himself, further putting him on the path to leave the Guardians and to visit his grandpa on Earth. It's just a moment that pulled out so much emotion out of me, and I loved it every time I watched it. I've listened to the song in this scene so much. This and the intro are tied for my favorite moments in this movie, with the ending coming in right behind them. I really like Peter's dynamic with Rocket. It's slowly become one of my favorite things in the Guardians movies. It reminds me of Steve and Tony's relationship a little bit, with how they get into it and bicker, but they subtly show their love for each other. Their relationship really shines in this movie, and I really like Chris Pratt's acting in this. He really brought his A game when things got really tense and emotional. I just love how hard they make Peter go for Rocket in this movie. That's his dog for real. Well, everyone's giving 110% for Rocket, but Peter's the spearhead. I like how he's the one constantly kicking the plan in gear to save Rocket. I just love all the little moments. Like him doing that guy who tortured Rocket extra dirty, literally jumping 1,000 feet plus out of a window with the guy in his hands, and then using the guy's body to brutally stop him and Groot's fall from that 1,000-foot jump. And then Peter ruthlessly cuts what they need out of the guy's head, showing him no mercy at all in the name of Rocket. Like, that's really his fucking bro. I loved it. The sweeter moments between them hit hard too, like when Rocket comes back to life. Rocket, Peter, and Groot all hug each other. I just love this moment. I just love all three of them together. Or like how Peter tells Rocket he'll be a better leader than him. And probably my favorite one, at the end of the movie, Peter gives his Zune to Rocket. I like how everyone loves Peter's music, but I especially love how attached Rocket got to it. Stealing Peter's Zune to simp to it and regularly singing song lyrics, it's just such a great moment of Peter letting go of something that's really important to him and giving it to Rocket. And then Rocket sharing it, connecting it to the speakers of the Guardians base. I just love how much Peter rubbed off on Rocket. The last thing I want to talk about before I move on from Peter's character is that I fucking love that he went back to Earth. I've been waiting him to do it for so long, and Endgame doesn't count. It was great seeing him connect with his grandpa, the only family he has left on his mom's side. They have a post-credit scene together with Peter eating cereal with his grandpa. That's pretty funny. I just like Peter's arc throughout these 3 movies, and this movie really wraps up his character in a way that I enjoyed so much. Mantis was never a standout on the team for me, but I enjoy her and Drax's dynamic so much. I think it's just so much fun. I loved it so much during the holiday special. I already liked Drax a lot, but that special made me really fuck with Mantis. Mantis is surprisingly a core part of this movie. She really takes the need when she's needed. She has really grown to be one of my favorite Guardians members. She just plays off of everyone so well. Her being the emotional compass for this movie makes so much sense for her character, considering her power set has to do with manipulating emotions. She really pushes everyone to confront their shortcomings, but I really like how much she did it for Peter. Pushing Drax to tell Peter to stop simping about Gamora and move on, and telling Peter to have more sympathy towards his grandpa. Because yeah, he lost his mom the day he got kidnapped, but his grandpa not only lost his daughter to cancer, but his grandson got abducted by aliens literally on the same fucking day. I never even looked at it from that perspective, and that just makes the reunion hit even harder for me. I really love the way this movie uses Mantis's powers. From just jokingly making Drax fall in love with his sock, and making a security guard fall in love with Drax so they can sneak by him, to her jumping around on her enemies' heads, changing their emotions. It was so fun to see her make her enemies dance mid-battle and act like cats. I think my favorite moment of her using her powers was her using them on Cosmo. Mantis uses her powers to manipulate Cosmo into thinking that she has more strength so she can use her telekinesis more to save everyone at the end of the movie. I never expected to like Mantis this much, but I'm so glad that she was on the Guardians team. The High Evolutionary was so damn tough in this movie. I have some minor problems with him that I'll get into in a little bit. Every scene he was in was so fucking tense. I just love the psychological hold that he has on Rocket. It made Rocket standing up to him really impactful. I have my problems with the final confrontation between them, but the emotion behind it still hit super hard. Every line that Chukwudi delivers as the High is so damn entertaining. His subtleness in his performance when he's not going batshit crazy is so good. I just love the disgustedness he has for everything he deems beneath him. Like his slight face twitches when Baby Rocket gets something wrong. You can just tell he's disgusted by all the creatures he's experimenting on, especially Rocket. His subtle wordless reactions to things just add so much to his fragile god complex. I just love how we can see the cracks in his fragile god complex. Small stuff like his henchman sliding a box under his feet before he confronts the gold lady so he can tower over her and look down on his creation. And bigger stuff like Baby Rocket solving something that he couldn't. And this making him so uncontrollably distraught and frustrated to the point of delirium. All because he can't even fathom that something he created can solve the one thing he couldn't. This is such a good moment because it just shows how much he overestimates himself. And it's a good look at how fragile and insecure he is under his god complex. Literally all the High's moments on screen were some of my favorites. But if I just had to pick just one, it would be when his own people turned on him. His main follower tells him, "Stop for God's sakes." And the High replies back with another perfectly intense line delivery from Chukwudi. "There is no God! That's why I stepped in!" Before hitting a Vegeta final explosion, literally disintegrating every one of his followers in the room. Which leads into one of my favorite sequences in the movie. After the High kills everyone in a flash of light, this orchestral opera music starts to play as the High slowly walks through the debris. This was one of my favorite visual moments in the movie. The flash of light slowly fades away, with the lighting and shadows highlighting the High's frame among all the debris and fire he caused. The orchestral opera music that plays during the High scenes just fits this one so well. It just adds to that larger-than-life god complex that the High has. But it's the best during this scene, because the visuals and the music just make it feel like some type of godly rebirth or something. But back to that, "There is no God, that's why I stepped in" line that the High says. So who's gonna tell Doggy that there's a whole council of gods in Thor 4 and Moon Knight? So there's a lot of gods in the MCU. I know it's not intentional, but it would be cool if this was tied in with the gods failing the High, like Gor's god did him in Love and Thunder. Obviously the High didn't get the luck of finding his god in to confront him for not helping. So he probably just thinks that there aren't any gods, so he just stepped up and started playing God himself. But I know that James Gunn didn't make it so that's the case. So it's honestly even more twisted that the High's doing this stuff just because he's a sick, deplorable person. Before I get into my problems with him, I want to talk about the High's conversation he has with Peter about Counter-Earth being a cesspool like regular Earth. I just love it so much because Peter's making all these great points about octopuses selling meth to kids, and you just expect the High to disagree and to make excuses for his plan or something. He just quickly agrees with Peter and so nonchalantly just instantly destroys the whole planet with all his creations on it. Stuff like this just adds so much despicableness and ruthless to the High's character. I love how intimidating and opposing he is beyond the standard physical way, which he has as well. But this movie doesn't do a lot with him on the action side. So moments like this and Chuck Woody's great performance really make up for his lack of action, which leads me into my first problem with the High. When I say problems in this instance, I mean this in the most minor way possible. Because yeah, they're problems, but I still really like what we actually got. He's really just a villain for Rocket, which I don't necessarily have a problem with because Ego was just a villain for Peter in the last movie, but Ego is still a great villain for the rest of the team. I'm not saying that the High Evolutionary doesn't work as a villain for the rest of the Guardians team, because he does, but most of his pivotal hard-hitting scenes and the little action he has are in flashbacks with Rocket or against other people. I just wish we got more meaningful moments with other Guardians members, like his conversation with Peter. My second problem with him is that this movie feels like they're purposely trying to avoid the High throwing hands with the rest of the Guardians. They literally have one action scene against him that lasts less than like a minute. His character still works because like I said, he's menacing in other ways, but I don't know, it's just a weird choice because it's not like they show that the High can't fight or doesn't have power. He's not one of those villains like Baron Zemo or Armin Zola that doesn't need power to take down the heroes. He easily takes down Groot and Peter. He knocks out Drax, Nebula, and Mantis in literally one hand wave. And he easily incinerates everyone in a room without taking a scratch on him. But he just loses to Rocket in one shot and the Guardians jump him. Them beating him so easily would have been fine if he was just purely portrayed as an enemy that just has a psychological hold on Rocket and has henchmen like Adam Warlock and his other creations to handle the Guardians. So it's weird that he doesn't have any extended action scenes with any of the Guardians. I get why he lost too. He was too arrogant and had too much confidence in his gravity powers. So Rocket was able to use his gravity boots from the start of the movie to surprise him and get a shot off to destroy his suit. The thing that makes him so OP and making him vulnerable. So that works and it's good. I just think the same thing could have been achieved if the Guardians fought him and that was still the ending outcome. Because the Guardians literally rush in seconds after Rocket shoots him. That just further adds to me thinking that this movie is just weirdly avoiding the Guardians throwing hands with him. This would have been a bigger problem if he wasn't so opposing in other ways. So instead, it just feels like an awkward creative decision to me that I could see some people counting as a negative, but it just falls in the middle area for me. I just would have liked to see his powers on full display against the Guardians, and seeing the creative things that they could have done in the action sequences with his gravity powers. The last thing before I move on from his character is I really like his motivations. He doesn't want to take over the universe or destroy it. He just wants to sadistically perfect his experiments on his weird little furry planet, Counter-Earth. And I think his motivations for wanting Rocket so bad are so strong as well. Out of all the creations that he deems better than Rocket, Rocket is the only one that could think for himself, be truly inventive, make his own creations, and have the will to survive on his own. The High's other creations don't think like this. So the High wants Rocket's brain to see why that is, so he can apply it to his other perfect creations. I just think also that the High's motivations come full circle for Rocket as well, because he wants to be perfect like the High's other creations, so he looks at himself as a monster. But he doesn't realize that he's the one that's a perfect creation, despite his imperfections. Drax is just Drax, and that's not a bad thing, at least for me. I don't think I'll ever not find his character funny. But to be honest, his character arc throughout these movies have been pretty ass and lackluster. But I think that this movie really saves his character arc and makes it come full circle in a way that I like a lot. Before the first Guardians movie, I probably barely knew anything about Drax, and that's if I knew anything at all. I've liked him since his first MCU appearance, but after learning more about him in the comics after the first Guardians movie, I've always thought his character was done dirty compared to how he is in the comics. Being smacked around so easily by Ronin, not even getting a proper battle with the man that killed his family. They have never done anything in these movies to make Drax feel like Drax the Destroyer. So I agree with people saying that his character is a bad adaptation compared to how he is in the comics. But being comic accurate isn't everything. It's really a case-by-case situation, with it being more important for mainstream characters like Spider-Man, Batman, or Superman. And unknown characters and non-mainstream characters like Drax are more acceptable to change. So him not really being like the comic version is okay, because the way Dave Bautista plays him is so damn funny. And probably out of every character in the MCU, his comedy moments land the most with me. My problem is, they set up his arc to not really do anything with it. They don't even at least give him a conversation with Thanos about how he slaughtered his whole family. And that's not entirely James Gunn's fault, because all their interaction with Thanos are in movies that he didn't write. So the writer of those movies probably didn't even care about that. But James Gunn could have still gave him his proper shine with Ronan in the first movie. Drax in these movies just feels like comedic relief with some emotional moments here and there. But even still, I really still fuck with this character tough. And even with the underwhelming use of his character throughout these movies, Guardians 3 manages to conclude his arc so perfectly with just one line. You weren't born to be a destroyer. You were born to be a dad. I think this one line, from Nebula of all people, makes up for the lack of destroying that Drax the Destroyer was supposed to be doing in these movies. I think that this line is an acknowledgement of how he didn't get to do the one thing he wanted to do. Destroy Thanos. But it still heartwarmingly brings his arc full circle with caring about his wife and daughter so much. Drax is shown to be really good with kids in this movie, which I liked a lot. It was such a cute moment, and it's very fitting for this more goofy version of the character. So even though I would have liked him to be more of a destroyer in this trilogy, this movie still manages to take the shortcomings of the development of his character and still deliver something so impactful with his character, and that in itself needs to be praised. I honestly can't decide who has a more tragic backstory, Nebula or Rocket. There's so much depth and sadness to her backstory. The abuse, torture, and emotional manipulation that Thanos puts her through is so heartbreaking. I think Nebula has one of the strongest low-key arcs in the MCU. She goes through so much progression and emotional growth from when we first see her. I like Nebula a lot, but I was never really sold on her being part of the Guardians family. On the team, yes, but the family, no. She was on her way to feel part of the family with the emotional moments she has with Rocket in Endgame, with being the only two Guardians left. I get the others' connection that they have with each other, but besides her connection to her sister, there hasn't really been any time to explore her connection with the other Guardians. But this movie made me realize how much she looks at them as family and how much she cares about them. Seeing Nebula's reaction to hearing Rocket is alive is what really sold it for me. She just has this face of pure relief and jubilance when she hears his voice again for the first time. They have this subtle relationship that they build in Endgame, being the only Guardians to survive the snap, and I think this movie does a very good job capitalizing on that. Nebula says in this movie that what happened to Rocket was worse than what happened to her. I just think that this movie does a very good job at using small moments like Nebula's quick comparison of her and Rocket, or her quick reaction to Rocket being alive, to wrap up everyone's arc as effective as they can with the time that they have. They don't have time to handle and address everything, but I would say they're at least 85 to 95% on point. One of my favorite things about Nebula though is the sisterhood that she forms with Gamora throughout these movies. Compared to everyone, she lost the most when Gamora died, because that's literally her sister, and they were just starting to get really close after the second Guardians movie. So I was anticipating their reunion as much as Peter and Gamora's. I just love how Nebula has a solid low-key relationship with Gamora before the movie even starts. I wish we got a little bit more of the relationship, but there's still some really solid moments, like Gamora refusing to leave Nebula with the High Evolutionary, and Nebula getting Gamora to work with them in the first place. That stuff, plus their grunts of acknowledgement towards each other, really makes it still feel like they have a solid relationship, even though Gamora is off doing her own thing. Before I move on from Nebula, I just want to quickly talk about her action. It was so fire in this movie. I don't know if I missed something, or if this is the first time that she's popping out with it, but I really like her new arm. It just does a bunch of cool shit. It's what I thought Bucky's upgraded vibranium arm was going to be like. Not as advanced, but I thought it was going to be able to do cool things, but I guess it's just vibranium. This movie does a really good job at playing off the fact that Nebula is fully cybernetic. She gets really fucked up sometimes. Her whole torso knocked out of place, her limbs bent and broken, but everything just cybernetically snapbacks in place and she's fine. It's just so cool. They incorporate that into one of my favorite MCU action scenes that I'll be talking about later. This movie is just an amazing conclusion to her heartbreaking, triumphant character arc. And it works really well because her role has always been pretty small in these movies. So she never needed a bunch of screen time to be an impactful character. Like I said, Rocket and Gamora are my favorite Guardians. One of the reasons why I like Gamora so much is because she's such a badass. Daughter of the Mad Titan Thanos, labeled the most dangerous woman in the galaxy. Combat expert, super strength and durability. She's just so fucking cool to me. But what I like just as much as all of that is the way she softens up to be a part of the Guardians family and how she starts to care about them over time. Like the way she treats baby Groot in the second Guardians movie is so sweet. I was wondering how they were going to incorporate this new Gamora into this story, but they do it pretty cleverly. With her becoming the leader of the Ravengers since we last seen her in Endgame, and Nebula hiring her to do a job with them, it just makes so much sense that's what this new version of Gamora would do. Her not being all the way good yet because she got pulled out of her timeline just before she met the Guardians family and softens her up. But she was just good enough to flip on Thanos and not let him kill half the universe in Endgame. So what does a Gamora who hasn't met the Guardians yet, is still ruthless as fuck, and isn't under the rule of Thanos anymore go do? Takes over the Ravengers, becoming top dog of the group who's been shown to be a powerful force in the Guardians movies, often deciding the outcomes of battles depending on whatever side they choose to help. The idea of her leading the Ravengers is pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie, and some of the OG Guardians members being on her team makes it even more interesting. It's like, did she come in and whoop their ass to become their leader? Or did she already have the pull to come in and be their leader automatically just off her name alone? I pretty much don't know anything about the OG Guardians on her Ravenger team, but I really like the red lizard guy that has the same magic as Doctor Strange. He portals in Gamora and the rest of their crew to raid the Guardians ship, which was a fun moment. But just the concept of a space pirate able to do weird ass spells like Doctor Strange, traveling around the galaxy with a badass like Gamora, raiding ships and getting into battles, it's just fun to think about. I just like how this Ravager version of her is so ruthless and is on 10 for the whole movie. Her intensity reminds me of Yondu. She's a very fitting leader for the Ravengers. The whole sequence when she was with the Guardians breaking into the eye place was hilarious. That whole thing had some of my favorite Gamora moments. It's just funny how gun-ho this version of Gamora is. Her arc was subtle, but it worked. I talked about it a little bit in Peter's section, but I just really like how this story stuck to its guns and just let her be her own person. Yeah, it hurts that she's not with the Guardians anymore, but the obvious route would have just had her join the Guardians by the end of the movie. But they don't. They let her stick with the new team and family she built with the Ravengers. They let her be her own character. This movie doesn't make her fall back in love with Peter, and it was honestly so refreshing. Just like her being a Guardian again, her falling in love with Peter is the obvious route. So I just like how they didn't do that and how it worked out. It's just really good setup for her character. But I like that you see glimpses of the spark that they once had, with Gamora even telling Peter, "I bet we were fun." It makes the relationship have like a what could have been vibe, which is sad, but I'm happy to see it for these characters, because now they can grow in their own ways, and maybe, who knows, maybe they will get back together in the future. I really wasn't expecting to like this new Gamora so much, because obviously this isn't the same Gamora that I've grown to like over all these movies, but her character is so fun in this. It sucks that we won't be seeing her again, and if we do, it won't be written by James Gunn. I still don't think this new version of Groot is as old as the Guardians 1 version, but I really like this new young adult version of Groot. I had to get used to his new character design though. The first time that we see it is in the holiday special, and I still really didn't like it in that. It just looked off. He looks like a buff baby, but I got used to it by the end of this movie. And I guess it served a purpose in a way. Since he was bulkier, I feel like that gave him more space to store more guns in his body when he sneaks past the high security, which leads into a super cool action scene. That whole thing was super fun, and it's probably my favorite Groot shootout moment. I like how it ended with Groot comedically jumping out of the window in front of the High, and the High like being kind of confused by it. And then after jumping out of the window, Groot sprouts wings, which is new for him. He does a bunch of new stuff in this movie. He can extend all his limbs and become like this lanky kaiju monster, and the post-credit scenes show him really big, like the Hulk size, but like a little bigger. His character design during that post-credit scene was really cool, and it's honestly my favorite Groot character design that we've seen so far. I saw someone on Twitter come up with a cool name for him, which was King Groot, and it actually was really fitting because like his head makes like this crown type, I guess, figure, and King Groot, I guess, is fitting. I really like the smaller stuff he can do, like being able to lose all his body except his head, and then sprouting roots from his head so he's able to still get around. And like after his battle with Adam Warlock, he's rebuilding his body while everyone else is talking, and you can just see the frame of him growing. It's little details like that that make movies fun for me, because they could have just had him be a head for a little bit and just grow his body off screen, and then he's regular Groot back in action. Groot has always had good emotional moments in the Guardians movies. He doesn't have as big of moments like in the previous movies, but there's still a couple of smaller ones that I really enjoy. When Peter is blackout drunk, everyone is nonchalant about it because it's normal, but Groot is still running up to him, touching his head, making sure he's okay, thinking something's actually wrong with him. And when Groot is just ahead, he's still super concerned and checking on Drax after they get smacked around by Adam Warlock. I just love how empathetic Groot is. While Groot isn't one of the characters whose arcs come to a complete end in this movie, he still has a really great moment of closure with Gamora. At the end of the movie, after everything that this new Gamora has went through with the Guardians, she tells Groot, "It was good working with you." Considering how motherly she was to Groot when he was just a baby, he lost a mother figure when OG Gamora died. I'm so glad that Groot got this moment with her.
We thank you, High Priestess. Okay.
Hey, it'll be just a couple of days. We'll be back before Rocket's finished fixing the ship.
What if the Sovereign come?
I really wasn't a fan of Adam Warlock on my first watch. I felt like he was wasted. He and the other gold lady from the second movie felt like they were only included to tie up the loose end of being teased at the end of the last movie. I feel like he didn't really add anything to the story. I didn't hate him. I liked his action sequences a lot and his display of power, but that was pretty much it. He was really just used as comedic relief for me, which isn't necessarily bad because I didn't think he was annoying. There are some really funny moments with him. My favorite one being when Gamora takes his alien dog hostage in the middle of their fight. Adam just abruptly goes from trying to kill her to negotiation mode. It was just a funny fast switch up to him being hell-bent on killing her. But on my second watch, I saw the importance of his character and the subtle arc he was on and how important he was to the theme of family. I ended up really liking him, but I get why people have a problem with his portrayal in this movie. I know he plays a big role in the comics during the whole Infinity War saga with Thanos and everything, but he hasn't been in the MCU until now. So if Adam Warlock is one of your favorite characters or something, then it's understandable why you think his role is underwhelming in this movie. But I don't have any connection with him besides the new Guardians game, which I think is so fire. That game was a surprising banger that I don't hear talked about a lot. I don't think he's the perfect character in this movie, but what he's used for is great. It doesn't feel like he's wasted anymore, like MODOK and Ant-Man, but I still feel like he's pretty underutilized. I just would have liked a character that's been teased since 2017 to have a bigger, more serious role. I know this movie is already 2.5 hours long, but there was a real missed opportunity to dive deeper emotionally into his character. There's this very bright glimpse of a tragically touching story with the smile he gives in his last shot in this movie. There's still time to give him more characterization since he's on the Guardians team, if they choose to do something with that post-credit scene. But I still really enjoyed him for what he is in this movie. The last two characters I want to talk about are Cosmo and Kraglin. They have smaller roles, but I still really like them, so I want to quickly talk about them. Cosmo the Space Dog is far from my favorite character in the Marvel Universe, but I just think the concept for them is really fun and interesting. A test animal for the Soviet space program was sent to space, but his spacecraft drifted out of Earth's orbit, and he eventually crashes on Nowhere, getting telekinetic powers through cosmic radiation and becoming the chief security of Nowhere. It's just a silly but tragic backstory. I always enjoy when he pops up in anything. He was super fun in the new Guardians game. Cosmo had a small part in this holiday special, but she was still super fun in it. She has a bigger role in this movie, but it's still small compared to some of the other Guardians. But I'm glad she has some good moments, and I enjoyed her inclusion a lot. I hope we see more of Cosmo in the MCU. Kraglin has a surprisingly sad story throughout these movies. I think he's an underrated member. Not my favorite, but I still think he's underrated. You want to know the thing that I've been thinking since the holiday special? His fin thing looks so disturbing and icky. The way like you just see the skin flaps is just like, it just creeps me out. I hate looking at it. But he has a small role in this movie, like he does throughout all these movies, but he's still handled somewhat decently. There is a really big missed opportunity with this character that I guess will be kicking off the problems I had with this movie. This movie just doesn't address some things or just doesn't spend enough time with them. They really missed an opportunity to highlight Peter and Kraglin's brotherly relationship that they built throughout these movies, and especially the holiday special. He has literally known Kraglin the longest throughout all these movies. They're basically brothers. Peter is over here acknowledging Mantis as his sister and being all gung-ho for Rocket, but this man barely has any time with Kraglin. They could have had a great moment with Peter telling him he believes in him to use the arrow and that Yondu would believe in him too. And Kraglin could have just shrugged it off in the moment, really not believing what Peter said, but remembering what Peter said later on. That could have made him start to believe in himself and play into the vision that he has of Yondu. I think that just would have made Kraglin's archetype a lot better. Another instance is with Mantis. At the start of the movie, she tells everyone that it's wrong to manipulate the feelings of her friends. But later in the movie, when she's criticizing Nebula for calling Drax a liability for being stupid, Mantis defends Drax by saying it's okay he's a dum-dum because he has other quality values. But when Drax takes offense that Mantis called him stupid, she uses her powers to make Drax forget that she even said that, and Nebula says nothing to her. This was a perfect moment for Nebula to check Mantis and make her reflect on her actions the same way that she was doing to her. Because I think it's different making a friend forget a negative thing you said about them, and using your powers on them to make them jokingly fall in love with a sock or some stupid shit like that. It would have just been a nice moment of those two making each other grow. The next problem that I have is that there are too many fake out deaths. It works for now because the trailers were heavily hinting that Rocket was going to die. Interviews and comments of Dave Bautista and Zoe Saldana saying they don't want to play Drax and Gamora anymore. Literally James Gunn saying this is the last Guardians movie he's making. And just the overall time that everyone's been playing these characters. Deadass since 2014, nearly 10 years ago. So you'd expect them as actors and just as people to not just want to do the same thing forever. Just the real world pop culture discussion of this movie just have you expecting that someone is gonna die. Don't get me wrong, I love that no one died in this movie. It was a nice subversion of all the previously mentioned expectations. But you have Rocket's death fake out, which works. You have Peter's at the end that works comedically, and works for some characterization for Adam Warlock, and his contribution to the theme of family. And then you have Nebula and Drax at the eye place randomly get blasted up. I think it's a nice tonal shift from the fun that they were having with the fight, but they just end up being fine in a few scenes later. And it was just like, okay, that was dramatic as fuck for no reason, but it plays into the audience into thinking that they were gonna die because that's been the whole vibe surrounding this movie. So this isn't necessarily a problem now, but I wonder how that will feel in a couple years when people forget about all the pop culture discussion around this movie about who is gonna die. It's like when Andrew Garfield first appears in No Way Home. There are these weird pauses in dialogue in that scene. It's because the writers and creators knew that people were gonna go crazy with this introduction. So if you just have them talk without pauses, you wouldn't be able to hear shit. This worked when I went to go see this movie opening night when everyone was literally going ballistic at every character introduction, but watching it at home just made the pauses for cheers feel awkward. So just like how that felt weird over time, I wonder if this will feel weird over time. Only time will tell, but again, it's really minor if it does end up being a problem in the future. My next problem is pretty minor, but there's just a couple plot conveniences that just really annoyed me. Like when Gamora carelessly gives her location to the Gold Lady thinking she was a part of a Ravager crew. I have no clue how Gamora thought she was a part of her team. The Gold Lady sounds like the Queen of Britain, proper as shit. And she didn't even try to fake a voice like she was a part of Gamora's team, or have someone else speak like literally anything. It really isn't a big deal, but it just stands out so much to me, because this feels like the only part of the story that didn't feel like it had much thought put into it. But I can't stress enough how minor it is. But I guess that just leads into the biggest plot convenience, which is Adam Warlock himself. He's pretty integral for the plot of this story, being the one who injures Rocket, kicking off the whole story in the first place, and saving Peter at the end. But he's just conveniently where the story needs him to be all the time, so he can just get his 2 minutes of screen time, drive the plot forward, be funny, and fuck off. I still like his character because how he plays in the theme of family, but I can't lie about the convenient role he plays. The last plot convenience that I noticed was the High Evolutionary using his powers to trap Peter and Groot. After he traps him, he walks out of the room, just before their big action sequence. Just as the High is leaving, Peter and Groot make their move, and Peter throws a bomb at the door, collapsing the archway. The High can't get back in, so while the High is taking his sweet ass time to break down the archway, Peter and Groot have this whole action shootout scene, and they escape just as he enters. I feel like this was an opportunity to have a fight with the High and really see him in action, which relates to what I said earlier about the High Evolutionary weirdly not fighting the Guardians. Those are pretty much all my problems, so back to me praising this movie. The practical costume and sets just look so fucking good. This movie just looks amazing. Wakanda Forever and this are some of the best looking Marvel movies to date. Even with some of Black Panther's questionable CGI, it's still visually pleasing on the whole. I just really love the sci-fi elements in this movie. They've always been great in the Guardians movies, but I really love it in this one. There's some really creative stuff, mostly in the eye theme place. That place is honestly one of my favorite sci-fi concepts in a while. It's so weird, cool, and creative. All of the technology in it is so unique. The weird Orgo-century flesh mechs that they had were so off-putting, but it was really a unique concept. That whole sequence was great. From them breaking in with their vibrant color spacesuits, walking on this flesh material and cutting it open with blood or pus clotting up and floating into space, to the clean white aesthetic of the facility, and the little cool technology that they had in it, like the little floating speakers that they use. I honestly don't remember if this was established or not, but it's really cool that Nowhere can fly. Nowhere's just such a cool concept, a dead celestial head turned into a base, and it being able to fly around the galaxy. And not just fly, but it's able to jump through jump ports, aka hyperspeed. I just love when it comes and breaks through multiple jump ports because it's so big. Compared to one ship that just goes through one jump port, Nowhere goes through like 6 and like rips them apart. It was just visually cool, and I really like when sci-fi plays off of and builds on already established lore. Time to talk about the action. That hallway fight. This fight is probably my favorite action sequence in the MCU. Next to War Machine and Iron Man tearing through robots in Iron Man 2, and Spider-Man vs. Green Goblin in No Way Home. This fight is just so gritty and grimy, Groot exploding enemies from the inside out, Rocket blasting cannon-sized holes into monsters, Drax slipping and squeaking on blood, pinning people to walls with his knives, Gamora ruthlessly gutting enemies. It just feels like one of the more violent fights in the MCU, and I'm all here for it. I really love what they do with Nebula during this fight, and they play off her cybernetics. Getting her head knocked out of place, literally hanging off her body, her limbs bent and broken out of place, but she's still able to look around around and shoot, and everything just snaps back in place while she's still looking around and shooting. It's just so smooth. I just love the synergy and choreography in this fight. I just love when teams work seamlessly together. I love the camera work during the fight too. It just gives it so much visual style and flair. The fight did look a little video gamey at times, but it was nothing too bad. I really love all of Adam Warlock's action. I love the way he just comes in and leaves the team in complete shambles, leaving Groot as just a head, disfiguring Nebula, snapping Mantis' arm, nearly beating Drax to death, and literally almost killing Rocket, kicking off this whole movie. I think the biggest takeaway I got from all the display of his powers, super strength, durability, lasers, and flight, is how James Gunn handles a person with Superman level powers. With Superman Legacy coming out, which is being made by James Gunn, I think that this is a good glimpse at what James Gunn could do with someone at Superman's power level. While Adam Warlock is not as strong as Superman in this movie, we still see him flying around at high speeds, effortlessly toss people, and easily tear through things. Obviously, not exactly how they show it in this movie, but I can see a lot of what Adam Warlock does in this movie translate well to James Gunn's Superman movie, particularly his flight. The family theme just hits so hard for me in this movie. It's always been strong in the Guardians movies, but I really felt it in this one. I just like how they all love each other and put each other to be on paths to be better. When Rocket comes back to life, hugging Peter and Groot, it makes Ravager and Gamora smile. It's really a touching moment. I think it helps her understand their family and the role that she played in it. The way the ending of this movie really hammers home the family theme and wraps up everything so perfectly is amazing. Because even though Gamora doesn't have a family in the Guardians anymore, she has a new family she built with the Ravengers. Seeing Gamora with them at the end, smiling and hugging, and even though we've gotten barely any screen time with any of her members and even her herself, it just felt familiar and heartwarming. And it just felt like she was with the OG Guardians. I just love that moment so much, and it really hammers home the family theme. I love some of the parallels that the ending has with the intro and the rest of the movie. The intro for this movie really lays the seeds perfectly for the ending. Small stuff like Drax refusing to dance but ends up busting a move with everyone at the end, or perfectly setting up Rocket's character arc with the parallels of his mental state at the start of the movie, isolating himself with the music he stole from Peter, and him just feeling alone and not feeling like he fits in with everyone else, compared to the ending of Peter gifting that Zune to Rocket. And instead of isolating himself again with the music, he shares it with all of the residents of Nowhere, dancing with his family and letting out a scream from the depths of his soul the same way he did when he lost Lila. But instead of it being a scream of agony and despair, it's a scream of pure joy and belonging. Adam Warlock smiling at the end was, no lie, my favorite part of the ending. Adam Warlock, he's a kid mentally, which means he's very impressionable. So he's inspired by Groot because Groot saves him and says everyone deserves a second chance. And Adam saves Peter at the end because of that. I think Adam's smile truly shows the importance of what the Guardians stand for, because him seeing them being a family and embracing each other inspires him to be good and join the team. I just love what his simple smile and the look in his eyes mean. He has this look of content and belonging. It's just one of those moments where an actor says so much with just their facial expression. It's just so good. Although Adam Warlock is pretty underutilized, he plays a big role in the theme of family. This moment perfectly captures the importance of the Guardians family and the role they play for each other and the people around them. The ending is just a perfect send-off for all these characters, whether they do their own thing or stay on the team. No one dies, and that's actually surprising. But I feel like this ending would have impacted me more than if someone died, because that's to be expected. So when all these characters survive and you see them actually happy, you feel genuine happiness for them. This is my favorite ending right next to Infinity War. And I can't wait to see where this movie falls in my comic book ranking in the future. I know this was a longer one, so if you made it to the end of the video, thank you. Like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe for future videos.